Imagine a world where in one moment, you're surrounded by laughter, warmth, and the familiar voices of loved ones. The next moment, that joy is shattered by cries for help, hands reaching out in desperation, and your own heart racing as your life flashes before your eyes. It's a reminder of how, in an instant, life can spiral into the unimaginable. This isn't the plot of a movie, but the chilling reality of one family's nightmare. On December 24th, 2008, the quiet town of Covina, California, was rocked by an unspeakable tragedy. What was meant to be a joyous Christmas Eve celebration turned into one of the most horrifying cases of family violence in recent history. In a calculated attack, 9 lives were taken, and a close-knit community was left traumatized. Known as the Covina family massacre, this brutal act left an indelible mark on all who heard the story. Our hearts go out to the Ortega family, whose joyful evening was transformed into a nightmare, and to all who knew and loved them. As we delve into the details of this heartbreaking story, we honor their memories, recognizing the loss and pain endured by the survivors and the community still affected by this tragedy. It was a scene straight from a holiday card on Christmas Eve at the Ortega family's home in Covina, California. The house, festively adorned with twinkling lights and warm decorations, radiated the magic of Christmas. Outside, a light chill hung in the air, but within these walls, the Ortega family was wrapped in the warmth of togetherness and joy, celebrating the season they treasured most. Every Christmas, they gathered in like this: children, parents, grandparents, siblings, and cousins, coming together to create memories they would talk about for years. In the dining room, the laughter was loudest, where the family was engaged in a spirited game of Texas Hold'em. It was a yearly tradition they all looked forward to, a chance for gentle competition, playful teasing, and lighthearted banter. Around the table, Joe Ortega, the family's patriarch, sat with his beloved wife of 53 years, Alicia. Their smiles lit up the room as they watched their children and grandchildren joke and compete, faces illuminated in the glow of holiday lights. Joe's hearty laughter boomed each time someone won a hand, and Alicia's warm gaze moved lovingly from one family member to another. She cherished these moments, a symbol of all they had built together over a lifetime. Across the room, their son Charles and his wife were talking about their own holiday memories, sharing stories with the family. Charles, with a wide grin, was recounting childhood Christmases when Joe would hide the presents and the children would race through the house, searching every nook and cranny. Everyone laughed, caught up in the nostalgia, remembering the playful warmth that had always defined their family. It was easy to get lost in this joy, each story a reminder of the bonds that held them all together. In the backyard, a group of young cousins were engrossed in video games, their excitement filling the air as they huddled close, eager to beat each other's high scores. They darted back and forth across the patio, laughing, shouting, and occasionally daring each other to jump into the chilly pool, a running joke among the kids that no one ever took seriously. For these young ones, this gathering was the highlight of their year. They loved being surrounded by family, a feeling of safety and happiness that seemed endless. Meanwhile, upstairs in his own quiet space, 17-year-old Michael Ortega was seated at his computer, lost in a world of his own. He was working on a project, his focus occasionally interrupted by the sounds of laughter and conversation that floated up from downstairs. Michael enjoyed these gatherings too, though he preferred to keep to himself. But the warmth of his family's presence was something he valued deeply, knowing that if he wanted, he could go downstairs and be met with open arms and smiles. Back downstairs, the family's evening continued, filled with little moments of love and connection that made the holiday feel so special. Some family members were still at the table, sipping on eggnog and talking about plans for the coming year. Others moved in and out of the kitchen, cleaning up dishes and sneaking a taste of the last remaining holiday treats. In the living room, a small group had gathered to watch a Christmas movie, the familiar sound of classic carols playing in the background. Each person was absorbed in their own favorite part of the celebration, from the oldest to the youngest, finding joy in the simplicity of being together. And just outside, the Ortega home stood proudly as it had every Christmas, a beacon of family and festivity in the quiet neighborhood of Covina. The windows glowed with a soft, welcoming light, inviting anyone who passed by to take in the sight of a family bound by love. This night felt timeless, a moment frozen in the kind of peace that only the holidays could bring. It was a time to forget the troubles of the world and simply enjoy the closeness of family, each person fully embraced by the joy that had surrounded them. In this picture-perfect scene, no one could have imagined that their lives would soon be changed forever. In these final untroubled moments, the Ortega family was unaware of the darkness about to descend. They laughed, they played, they reminisced, never knowing that this Christmas Eve, so full of warmth and laughter, would be their last as a complete family. The evening was calm and joyful, with the Ortega family fully immersed in their Christmas celebration. Laughter and conversation filled every corner of the house as children played and adults shared stories. Then a knock on the front door shattered the serenity of the night. An 8-year-old girl, caught up in the excitement of the holiday, ran to the door, squealing in delight as she called out, "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" She was expecting a magical moment, the arrival of Santa to bring Christmas cheer to their gathering. Instead, the man at the door, dressed as Santa, pulled out a handgun and aimed directly at her. The gunshot echoed throughout the house, piercing the joyful atmosphere and replacing it with terror. The little girl fell to the ground, and as her family realized what was happening, horror swept over them. Two of her uncles, acting instinctively, rushed toward her, desperate to protect her from further harm. But before they could shield her, the gunman aimed his weapon at them, shooting them both as they tried to reach their young niece. They fell beside her, helpless to stop the nightmare that was only beginning. Panic erupted as family members scattered, frantically trying to escape or hide from the intruder. Screams filled the house, drowning out the sounds of Christmas music that continued to play in the background, a haunting reminder of the joy that had been there only moments before. Some family members huddled together, crouching under tables or pressing themselves against walls, hoping to escape the gunman's line of sight. Others tried to shield their loved ones, standing between them and the attacker in a desperate attempt to save lives. The gunman, however, was relentless. He moved through the house with brutal efficiency, shooting anyone he saw. There was no mercy in his actions. He was there to inflict maximum pain and suffering, and he did so with a cold, calculated precision. Family members who had been enjoying their Christmas celebration just moments earlier were now struggling to survive, terrified as they witnessed the unimaginable horror unfolding around them. The attack was merciless and swift, leaving the Ortega family with no time to process what was happening. The man who had once been a familiar face to some in the family had now become a monstrous figure, disguised as Santa, yet bringing nothing but death and destruction. The peace of Christmas Eve had been ripped away, replaced by a brutal scene of violence and despair, as the gunman continued his horrific rampage without hesitation or remorse. As the horror of the night unfolded, the gunman pulled out one final devastating weapon, a homemade flamethrower. It was a weapon designed with pure malice, constructed to maximize destruction and leave no trace of the lives he intended to obliterate. The flames erupted as he activated it, and in a matter of seconds, the Ortega family's beloved home was transformed into a raging inferno. Walls that had once held countless cherished memories now became fuel for the flames as the fire spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. The blaze moved with terrifying speed, swallowing rooms, furniture, and decorations in seconds. The scent of burning wood and fabric mingled with the acrid smell of gasoline, creating a dense, suffocating smoke that filled the air. The family members who had tried to hide now found themselves trapped, with no way to escape the choking heat and the blinding darkness. For those caught inside, there was little time to react. The fire closed in, making every breath a struggle and every second an eternity. Outside, neighbors watched in shock and horror, drawn out of their homes by the sounds of screams and the sight of flames shooting high into the night sky. The fire grew so large that it was visible from blocks away, casting an eerie orange glow over the quiet streets of Covina. It was as if the entire house had been swallowed up by an infernal beast, with flames reaching heights of 40 to 50 feet, roaring with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. The blaze was so powerful that it defied immediate attempts to control it. Emergency calls flooded in, and within minutes the first wave of firefighters arrived. But even with all their equipment and expertise, they were confronted by a fire of unprecedented ferocity. The heat was overwhelming, pushing them back as they tried to get close enough to aim their hoses. They attacked the flames from multiple angles, but the fire fought back, fueled by the accelerants and the intensity of the attack. In total, 80 firefighters were called in, working tirelessly in shifts to subdue the inferno. And yet it took them over an hour and a half to bring it under control. As the fire finally began to die down, the true extent of the devastation became clear. The once vibrant home was now reduced to charred remnants, barely recognizable. The Ortega family's holiday decorations, the warm and welcoming rooms filled with memories, had all been obliterated, leaving behind only ashes and ruin. But the physical destruction was just the beginning. The fire had claimed lives, and identifying those who had perished became an even more difficult and heart-wrenching task due to the sheer intensity of the blaze. In the days that followed, investigators worked methodically, sifting through the rubble in search of clues. The flames had ravaged the bodies to the point where visual identification was impossible. Family members who had survived were spared the traumatic task of identifying their loved ones through sight alone. Instead, dental records became the main method for identification, with investigators meticulously matching dental x-rays to confirm each identity. In some cases, medical records were used, relying on unique scars, bone structures, or other physical markers that had somehow survived the intense heat. This painstaking process took time and left the surviving family and the community in a state of prolonged grief as they waited for confirmation of who had been lost. The damage inflicted by the gunman went beyond physical destruction. It had left emotional scars that would linger for years. The Ortegas' home, once a place of warmth and joy, had become a tragic symbol of unimaginable loss. Its smoldering remains a haunting reminder of a family torn apart in the cruelest way. And for the loved ones left behind, the knowledge of their family's final moments, trapped and overwhelmed by the flames, was a burden that would weigh on them forever. The Ortega family's Christmas Eve was transformed from a joyous gathering into a scene of unimaginable loss. The assault claimed the lives of 9 beloved family members, each one leaving a void that could never be filled. Among the victims were Joe Ortega, affectionately known as Papa Joe, a kind and wise patriarch whose warmth had always been the center of every family gathering. Beside him was his wife, Alicia, his partner of over 50 years, whose gentle spirit and love bound the family together. Their lives and the lives of 4 of their children, 2 daughters-in-law, and a grandchild were all cruelly taken, leaving a once tight-knit family shattered. Yet amidst the horror, a story of survival emerged, a testament to the strength and courage of those who endured the tragedy. Letitia Yusefsky, one of Joe and Alicia's daughters, managed to survive that horrific night. When the gunfire erupted, Letitia's instincts took over. She pulled her young daughter close and, along with other family members, dove beneath the dining room table, hoping to find some semblance of shelter. Heart-pounding, she held her daughter tightly, trying to stay calm, though chaos erupted around them. Desperately, Letitia dialed 911, her voice trembling as she described the nightmare unfolding in her home. Through her fear, she pleaded for help, her voice capturing the raw terror and urgency of the situation. Despite the imminent danger, Letitia's protective instincts took precedence. She noticed that her daughter had been injured, shot in the face, yet somehow alive and in need of immediate medical attention. She whispered words of comfort and strength, fighting her own panic as she assured her child that help would come. In the brief moments of reprieve from gunfire, Letitia helped guide her injured daughter and several other family members to safety, navigating them out of the house as the flames began to spread. Amidst the darkness and smoke, Letitia's actions saved lives. Despite the harrowing injuries sustained by her young daughter, who had been shot in the zip code, the girl managed to survive, later credited by medical experts with saving herself by instinctively turning her head at the last second, reducing the bullet's impact. This small miracle, however, did not diminish the trauma. Both mother and daughter would forever carry the physical and emotional scars of that night, but Letitia's courage in the face of horror gave her family a fighting chance. After the attack, Letitia found herself grappling not only with the loss of her parents and siblings, but also with the responsibility of being a source of strength for her surviving family members. In the wake of the tragedy, she would become a pillar for the children and relatives who had lost so much, holding them together through shared grief and a commitment to honor the memories of those they had lost. In the years that followed, Letitia would speak openly about the power of resilience and the importance of choosing love and gratitude over hate, carrying forward a legacy of hope in the face of tragedy. As investigators combed through the remains of the Ortega home and pieced together the harrowing events of that night, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The gunman, who had entered the home dressed as Santa Claus and committed unimaginable violence, was identified as Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, the ex-husband of Sylvia Ortega Pardo, one of Joe and Alicia's daughters. Recently divorced from Sylvia, Pardo had been harboring deep resentment and anger over the end of their marriage. This bitterness had festered, growing into an unthinkable rage that he unleashed on the family in the most brutal manner imaginable. As police delved further into Pardo's background and actions leading up to the attack, they uncovered chilling evidence of meticulous planning. Pardo's rented car, parked a short distance from the crime scene, held a shocking cache of weapons and supplies, suggesting he had prepared extensively for the night's horrific events. Investigators discovered the car was rigged with explosives, set to detonate if anyone attempted to tamper with it. The vehicle also contained thousands of dollars in cash, hidden beneath his clothing with plastic wrap and secured by a specialized girdle. His plan, it appeared, had been to escape after carrying out the massacre. But after setting the house ablaze, he had suffered severe burns, which thwarted his escape and ultimately led him to take his own life. When detectives searched Pardo's home, they found evidence that revealed even more sinister preparations. His residence was a virtual bomb factory filled with remnants of explosive devices and materials that he had been stockpiling. Empty handgun boxes, rounds of ammunition, and containers of highly flammable fuel were scattered throughout his home, indicating a level of premeditation that shocked even the most experienced investigators. Pardo's acquisition of multiple firearms and his assembly of a homemade flamethrower illustrated a methodical approach to violence, showing a man who was not only prepared to take lives but to inflict maximum destruction. In the community, people were stunned by the revelations. Pardo had long been perceived as a friendly, even charming man. Many neighbors described him as personable and thoughtful, known to smile and make small talk whenever they crossed paths. He had even been seen volunteering at a local church, ushering during services, and stopping by neighbors' homes to ask how they were doing. These outward gestures had masked a dark side that few, if any, had seen coming. Friends and acquaintances who had known Pardo before the divorce described him as seemingly stable and content. Yet, in the aftermath of the separation, a hidden side emerged, fueled by resentment and an obsessive need for control. His charm had concealed deeper issues: extreme narcissism, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, and a refusal to accept his failed marriage. The image of the affable, generous man that Pardo had maintained unraveled in the wake of his violent actions, leaving a community grappling with the shocking transformation of someone they had thought they knew. The investigation into Pardo's character and actions ultimately painted a portrait of a man who had been silently descending into a state of mental instability, allowing his anger and narcissism to drive him to the unthinkable. In the weeks that followed, this chilling revelation left the community of Covina struggling to reconcile the man they knew with the monstrous act he had committed, a reminder of how easily appearances can mask deeper, dangerous impulses. The motive behind Bruce Jeffrey Pardo's brutal actions lay in the turbulent breakdown of his marriage to Sylvia Ortega Pardo. What had started as a seemingly happy union had devolved into bitterness and resentment, a descent that ultimately drove Pardo to an act of unimaginable violence. Initially, Pardo had been drawn to Sylvia's warm and welcoming family, who embraced him and brought him into their close-knit circle. However, as time passed, Pardo's controlling and distant nature strained their relationship. Money became a frequent point of contention, with arguments centering around Pardo's unwillingness to support Sylvia's children from previous marriages. The warmth he had once shown her family faded, and by early 2008, the tension in their relationship had reached a breaking point. In March 2008, Sylvia made the decision to separate from Pardo, later filing for divorce. Pardo's reaction was harsh and unforgiving. Rather than working toward a respectful separation, he packed her belongings, leaving them on the driveway as a final dismissal of their life together. The divorce became final just days before Christmas, and by then, Pardo's anger and frustration had reached a dangerous peak. Rather than moving on, he allowed his anger to fester, and his resentment towards Sylvia and her family grew into a consuming desire for revenge. Months before the attack, Pardo began preparing meticulously for his plan. He started by purchasing firearms one by one, visiting local gun shops and buying each weapon in cash. Over the months, he acquired a small arsenal, including multiple handguns and an unusual flamethrower device that he would later use to set the Ortega home ablaze. The gun purchases were calculated, spaced out to avoid drawing attention. He also bought hundreds of rounds of ammunition, creating an ample supply for the deadly plan he was constructing. In a final disturbing touch, he ordered a custom-made Santa suit, ostensibly for a holiday party. However, this suit would become part of his disguise, allowing him to approach the Ortega home without arousing suspicion. This chilling choice added a layer of deception and irony to his plan, as he would arrive dressed as a figure of joy and innocence, only to unleash horror on the unsuspecting family. Pardo's preparations didn't end there. He also arranged a plan for escape, imagining that he could flee the scene and evade capture. He rented a car and packed it with essentials for a getaway: maps, food, water, clothing, and even a can of gasoline. Aware that his actions would attract a manhunt, he also wrapped $17,000 in cash around his legs, securing it with plastic wrap and a girdle. Pardo even went so far as to purchase a plane ticket to Illinois, hoping he could flee across the country and start a new life, leaving the wreckage of his actions behind. However, Pardo's plan quickly unraveled. In his final act of destruction, when he ignited the flamethrower and set the Ortega home on fire, he was severely injured. The flames backfired, burning him badly across his arms, hands, and face, causing excruciating pain and leaving him unable to carry out his escape. In desperation, he abandoned his plan to flee and instead drove to his brother's house, where he ultimately took his own life. His injuries and the utter failure of his plan underscored the dark irony of his intentions. In trying to destroy others, he had brought destruction upon himself. The methodical nature of Pardo's planning painted a disturbing portrait of a man consumed by anger and incapable of handling his loss in a rational way. His meticulous preparation, paired with his ultimate failure, revealed the depth of his hatred and the extent to which he was willing to go to exact revenge. In the end, Pardo's plan, built on resentment and rage, turned back on him, leaving him alone and broken. A fitting, though tragic, end to a night of horror that devastated the Ortega family and left a scar on the Covina community. The attack left the community of Covina in shock and profound mourning. The Ortega family was a respected, well-loved part of the neighborhood, known for their kindness, warmth, and strong family bonds. News of the massacre spread quickly, and residents were left grappling with the horror that had struck so close to home. Christmas lights that had decorated the neighborhood became haunting reminders of the night's violence, and the once peaceful, festive streets now felt heavy with grief. The entire town came together in an outpouring of support, holding vigils, setting up memorials, and finding ways to show solidarity with the Ortega family, even as they struggled to comprehend the brutality of the attack. For Letitia Yusefsky, the tragedy would forever alter her life. She had not only survived the horror, but had also saved her injured daughter and other family members, helping them escape through the fire and smoke. Yet her pain ran deep. The loss of her parents, siblings, and extended family was unimaginable, and the trauma of that night would be a permanent part of her memory. Despite the overwhelming grief, Letitia made a powerful choice. She would not let the darkness of that night define her or her family's legacy. Rather than allowing hatred and bitterness to consume her, she chose to honor the memories of her loved ones by focusing on resilience, love, and gratitude. In the years that followed, Letitia became a source of inspiration, speaking out about the power of resilience and forgiveness. She encouraged others to reject anger and revenge, instead promoting the importance of love and compassion in the face of tragedy. Her message was clear. Even in the wake of unimaginable loss, it was possible to find healing by focusing on the love that remained. Through her strength, she kept the spirit of her family alive, cherishing the good memories and refusing to let the actions of one individual overshadow the joy and kindness that had defined her family. The Covina community, too, drew strength from Letitia's example. The memories of the Ortega family were kept alive through annual gatherings, memorials, and acts of kindness that reminded everyone of the family's generosity and warmth. The detectives who had worked on the case maintained their connection with the surviving family members, particularly around the holidays, offering support and honoring their memory. Even as the years passed, the legacy of the Ortega family endured, a testament to their spirit and the resilience of those who survived. Letitia's choice to rise above hatred and her commitment to keeping her family's memory alive turned a tragedy into a story of courage, compassion, and healing, serving as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit in even the darkest times. As we close the story of the Covina family massacre, we're reminded of how, in an instant, joy can be shattered by tragedy. What began as a night of love, laughter, and holiday cheer ended in unimaginable loss. The events of that night left a lasting impact on the Ortega family, the Covina community, and all who have since heard their story. It's a stark reminder of how fragile life can be and how, even in the most cherished moments, we're never fully shielded from the potential for darkness. But from this tragedy, we also see a powerful example of resilience. Letitia's choice to honor her family's memory with love, rather than hate, speaks volumes about the strength of the human spirit. Her dedication to healing and sharing kindness serves as a reminder to all of us that, even in our most painful moments, we can choose to carry forward the light of those we have lost. Thank you for joining me in honoring the Ortega family's memory. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. How do you think such tragedies shape communities and families? Please feel free to share in the comments below. And if you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more true crime stories. It helps me continue bringing these important stories to light. Until next time, stay safe and remember to hold your loved ones close. In the early hours of December 29, 2017, a horrifying event unfolded on a quiet road in Argentina. 20-year-old Fernando Pastorizo was found lifeless, with 2 fatal gunshot wounds. Initially, the police suspected a robbery, but all of Fernando's belongings remained untouched. As the investigation progressed, a chilling truth emerged. The perpetrator was none other than his longtime girlfriend, Nahir Galarza. This was not just a case of murder, but a story of toxic love, manipulation, and a trial that shook the entire nation. Was justice served? And what led a young woman to become the youngest female in Argentina's history to receive a life sentence? Let's uncover the truth behind this shocking case. Fernando Pastorizo was born in '97 in Entre Rios, Argentina. He was the son of Gustavo Pastorizo and Silvia Mantis, a family that, despite being separated due to divorce, maintained a strong and amicable relationship to provide stability for Fernando and his sister, Carla. Fernando was known as a friendly, outgoing young man who brought warmth to everyone around him. With his open and humorous personality, he easily formed meaningful friendships and was deeply loved by his friends and family. His devotion to his family and his strong sense of responsibility made him a model of kindness and loyalty. In stark contrast, Nahir Galarza, born in 1998, was the daughter of Marcelo Galarza, a senior police officer, and Yamina Crow, a former police officer. Unlike Fernando, Nahir grew up in an environment of excessive indulgence. Her mother often turned a blind eye to her misbehavior, and in some cases even encouraged it. Her father, although stricter, was more idolized and respected as an authority figure. This permissive upbringing shaped Nahir into a self-centered and manipulative individual, willing to use others to get what she wanted. At school, she was admired for her beauty and popularity, but was also described by many as arrogant and prone to bullying those she considered beneath her. 2 individuals, raised in entirely different environments, Fernando with his kind and loving nature, and Nahir with her manipulative tendencies, would cross paths in a volatile relationship that ultimately led to a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Fernando Pastorizo and Nahir Galarza began their relationship in their early teenage years. At first, the bond between them seemed like a typical youthful romance, but it quickly took a darker and more tumultuous turn. While Fernando was deeply in love and dedicated to Nahir, she treated the relationship with indifference and frequently betrayed his trust. Nahir openly pursued relationships with other boys, even inviting them to her home, all while keeping Fernando in a state of emotional dependency. Her unwillingness to commit and constant infidelities created a toxic dynamic, where Fernando struggled between his feelings for her and the emotional pain she inflicted. Despite her betrayals, Fernando, when inexperienced in relationships and blinded by his affection, continued to tolerate Nahir's actions. Over time, this tolerance began to wane as he grew increasingly aware of the unhealthy nature of their bond. Whenever Fernando voiced his dissatisfaction or hinted at ending the relationship, Nahir would resort to extreme measures to maintain control. Her methods included emotional manipulation, verbal abuse, and even physical intimidation. She frequently checked his phone for messages, interrogated him about his interactions with other girls, and made baseless accusations of infidelity, ironically while she herself continued to see other men. Nahir's controlling nature became more apparent over time. Her jealousy manifested in aggressive outbursts whenever she felt threatened by Fernando's social life or perceived independence. On multiple occasions, she threatened him, using her father's position as a high-ranking police officer to intimidate him. "You'll regret it if you leave me," she would say, leveraging both emotional and physical power over him. These incidents left Fernando feeling trapped and powerless, unable to break free from the cycle of manipulation. The situation escalated dramatically on Christmas night, December 25, 2017. While attending a nightclub, Fernando was shocked to find Nahir openly kissing another man, Rafael, one of her boyfriends. The sight of this blatant betrayal in a public setting deeply hurt and humiliated Fernando. Summoning the courage to confront her, he demanded an explanation. Instead of de-escalating the situation, Nahir responded with hostility, and her friend, Sol Martinez, joined the fray. Together, they verbally and physically attacked Fernando in front of witnesses. Sol punched him in the face, and Nahir mocked him, using the argument as an opportunity to insult his character and family. The incident left Fernando emotionally and physically scarred. He confided in his friends, recounting the humiliation and pain he endured that night. He revealed that the verbal abuse stung the most, particularly Nahir's cruel comments about his family, which he cherished deeply. This event became the tipping point for Fernando, who decided he could no longer endure the toxic relationship. His friends encouraged him to move on and supported his decision to leave Nahir for good. With newfound determination, Fernando began planning his escape from the relationship. He enrolled in a college in another city, looking forward to a fresh start away from the chaos and emotional distress caused by Nahir. Moving away offered him a chance to rebuild his life and free himself from her manipulative grip. Despite his plans, Fernando remained cautious in his interactions with Nahir, fearing her unpredictable and controlling behavior. Unfortunately, Fernando's decision to leave would prove to be the catalyst for the tragedy that followed. For Nahir, the idea of losing control over Fernando was unacceptable. Her jealousy and sense of entitlement escalated, and she began devising ways to keep him tethered to her. As Fernando prepared to move forward with his life, Nahir's inability to let go would lead to a devastating and irreversible outcome. The night of December 28, 2017, seemed like a chance for closure. Fernando Pastorizo, weary from months of emotional turmoil in his relationship with Nahir Galarza, agreed to see her one last time. Nahir had pleaded for the meeting, telling him she wanted to spend the night together before they parted ways for good. Reluctantly, and perhaps hoping to end things on a peaceful note, Fernando arrived at her house, unaware of what the night would truly hold. Inside the Galarza home, everything appeared normal. The pair spent a few hours together, and according to some accounts, they shared intimate moments, perhaps as a final attempt to reconcile. But beneath Nahir's calm demeanor lay something darker. Unknown to Fernando, she had already decided that if she couldn't control him, no one else would. As the clock approached 5 o'clock a.m. on December 29th, Fernando prepared to leave. He was ready to move on, to start fresh in a new city, and to finally escape the toxic grip of Nahir's manipulative behavior. Just as he was about to go, Nahir stopped him. She asked him for one last favor, a ride to her grandmother's house. For Fernando, it was a small request, one he wouldn't think to refuse. Fernando started his motorcycle, and the two set off through the quiet streets of Gualeguaychú. The city slept, and the air was still, but tension lingered. In her pocket, Nahir carried her father's 9mm service pistol, the weight of the weapon a stark contrast to her calm exterior. As they reached a dark, isolated stretch of road, Nahir tapped Fernando on the shoulder and asked him to stop. Trusting her as he always had, Fernando complied, pulling over in the middle of nowhere. He turned to see what she needed, but before he could react, Nahir drew the gun and fired a shot into his back. The impact sent Fernando tumbling from the motorcycle, collapsing onto the ground in pain and confusion. As he lay there, helpless and bleeding, Nahir approached him. Without hesitation, she fired again, this time at point-blank range, ending his life instantly. In the eerie silence that followed, Nahir began her next calculated move. She crouched near Fernando's lifeless body, frantically searching for the shell casings to hide the evidence. Though she managed to retrieve one casing, she missed another, leaving a critical piece of proof behind. Her crime was almost witnessed by a passing taxi driver who saw a girl bent over someone lying on the ground. However, thinking it was nothing serious, the driver didn't stop. This brief encounter would later become a vital piece of testimony in the case. With her gruesome task complete, Nahir walked home as if nothing had happened. Security cameras captured her strolling through the streets at 5:22 am, her demeanor calm and collected. When she arrived home, she carefully returned the pistol to its place, took a shower, and went to bed, leaving no immediate sign of the horror she had unleashed. In the early hours of December 29, 2017, the quiet streets of Gualeguaychú were disturbed by a chilling discovery. Fernando Pastorizo's lifeless body was found lying on a remote road next to his motorcycle. When police arrived at the scene, they expected the crime to be a robbery gone wrong, an all too common occurrence in isolated areas. But something about the scene felt off. Fernando's motorcycle remained upright and undamaged, and his belongings, including his wallet, phone, and money, were untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of theft, and no obvious reason why someone would leave without taking anything. Investigators quickly concluded this was no random act of violence. Whoever had killed Fernando had a personal motive, and the crime was intentional. As police began their work, word of Fernando's death spread quickly through the small town. His friends and family were in shock, and people began sharing stories about his recent struggles. Central to these stories was one name that came up repeatedly: Nahir Galarza. Nahir was not just Fernando's ex-girlfriend. She had been an inescapable presence in his life for years. Their relationship was well known in Gualeguaychú, as were the frequent fights and dramatic reconciliations. To those who knew Fernando, it was no secret that their bond had become deeply toxic. Police now had a direction for their investigation. When investigators brought Nahir in for questioning, her behavior was far from what they expected. On social media, she had posted a heartfelt tribute to Fernando, calling him the love of her life and lamenting his loss. She painted herself as a grieving girlfriend, crushed by his sudden death. But in the interrogation room, Nahir was calm, too calm. She answered questions with an unsettling detachment, speaking about Fernando's murder, as though it were a minor inconvenience. Detectives noted her lack of visible emotion. There were no tears, no tremors in her voice, no signs of remorse or grief. When asked about her relationship with Fernando, Nahir described it as casual and downplayed its significance. She claimed they were merely acquaintances who occasionally spent time together, a blatant contradiction to the evidence of their long-term relationship. This initial lie set off alarm bells for investigators. As they pressed her further, Nahir began to suggest that someone else might be responsible for Fernando's death. She implied that it could have been a member of his family or even one of his closest friends. These attempts to shift blame, combined with her flat demeanor, raised serious suspicions. When evidence began to mount against her, Nahir's story started to change. Initially, she denied being involved in the murder at all, claiming she had no idea what had happened to Fernando. However, as investigators pieced together the events of the night, it became clear that Nahir was hiding something. Under mounting pressure, Nahir eventually admitted to the shooting, but insisted it was an act of self-defense. She told investigators that on the night of the murder, Fernando had become violent during an argument. She claimed he had taken her father's gun and forced her to go with him on his motorcycle. According to her, they fell during a struggle, and the gun went off accidentally, striking Fernando in the back. She then claimed that, in a panic, she fired a second shot, unintentionally killing him. But this version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny. The physical evidence told a different story. The gunshot wounds showed precise aiming, not accidental discharge. The trajectory of the bullets and the position of Fernando's body suggested he was shot deliberately while defenseless. Investigators also noted that Nahir had made no attempt to seek help after the shooting. Instead, she focused on covering her tracks, collecting shell casings, and returning the gun to its place before calmly walking home. Witness accounts and forensic evidence further unraveled Nahir's claims. A taxi driver who passed by the scene on the night of the murder reported seeing a young woman crouched near a man lying on the ground. At the time, he didn't think much of it and assumed it was a minor incident. This testimony placed Nahir at the crime scene. Additionally, security cameras captured her walking home at 5:22 a.m., calm and composed, with no signs of fear or distress. Investigators also recovered a shell casing she had failed to collect, providing crucial evidence linking her to the crime. Friends of Fernando came forward to describe the abuse he had endured during his relationship with Nahir. They recounted how she manipulated and controlled him, and how, in the days leading up to his death, Fernando had confided in them about his plans to leave her for good. These testimonies painted a clear picture of a toxic relationship that ended in tragedy. The weight of evidence against Nahir continued to grow, and her inconsistent stories only deepened the suspicion. As investigators prepared their case, one thing became clear. Fernando's death was no accident, and Nahir's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. As the evidence against Nahir Galarza mounted, her parents acted swiftly to protect their daughter. Marcelo Galarza, a senior police officer, used his influence to hire one of Argentina's top criminal defense lawyers. The defense quickly built their strategy, claiming that Nahir was not a cold-blooded killer, but a victim of domestic abuse who acted in self-defense. Marcelo publicly stated that Fernando had mistreated his daughter for years, leaving her with visible injuries that she had always excused as accidents. The defense even presented photographs of Nahir's hockey-related bruises, alleging they were signs of Fernando's violence. In court, Nahir took the stand to tell her story. She described Fernando as a controlling and violent partner, painting herself as a girl trapped in a toxic and abusive relationship. She claimed that on the night of the murder, Fernando had forced her onto his motorcycle and attacked her, leaving her no choice but to act in self-defense. Her testimony, emotional and seemingly heartfelt, was meant to sway both the court and public opinion. But cracks began to appear in her narrative. Fernando's friends testified about the pain and humiliation he had endured at Nahir's hands. They described her as manipulative and controlling, recounting how she monitored his phone, isolated him from his friends, and physically attacked him when she was jealous. They revealed Fernando had planned to leave her for good, confiding in them his fears about how she might react. A turning point came when Gabriel Cartagena, the psychologist hired by Nahir's defense, testified. Expected to support Nahir's claims of abuse, Cartagena instead described her as manipulative, narcissistic, and spoiled. He dismissed the notion that Fernando had been violent, asserting instead that Nahir had exerted psychological control over him. This stunning testimony from her own defense team's expert dealt a serious blow to her case. As the trial progressed, public opinion became sharply divided. Feminist groups and activists rallied behind Nahir, seeing her as a victim of gender-based violence and calling for her release. Protests filled the streets, and social media buzzed with hashtags demanding justice for Nahir. But others sided with Fernando's family, emphasizing the overwhelming evidence that painted Nahir as a cold and calculated murderer who refused to take responsibility for her actions. With each passing day, the weight of testimony and forensic evidence made it increasingly clear that Nahir's narrative was riddled with contradictions. Her defense team's efforts to shift the blame and portray Fernando as the aggressor crumbled under the scrutiny of facts and witness accounts. As the trial came to its conclusion, it was evident that justice would not be easily swayed by theatrics or public outcry. The truth of Nahir's actions could not be hidden, no matter how carefully she tried to craft her version of events. On July 3, 2018, the crowded courtroom in Gualeguaychú was silent as the judge read the verdict that had been months in the making. After weeks of emotional testimonies, forensic evidence, and conflicting stories, the jury convicted Nahir Galarza of aggravated homicide. Her sentence was life imprisonment. At just 19 years old, Nahir became the youngest woman in Argentina's history to receive such a punishment. For Fernando Pastorizo's family, the moment was bittersweet. They had spent months grieving the loss of their beloved son, enduring the public spectacle of the trial while defending his memory against Nahir's attempts to vilify him. The verdict was a vindication, but no sentence could ever restore the life that had been taken. As the courtroom cleared, Fernando's parents, Gustavo and Silvia, expressed their gratitude to the legal team and their determination to honor their son's memory. The verdict could not bring Fernando back, but it was a powerful statement that justice had been served. The trial of Nahir Galarza became a national and international media sensation, gripping audiences with its shocking details and divisive narratives. Headlines across Argentina chronicled every twist and turn, with Nahir's face splashed across news outlets and social media. To some, she was a cold-blooded killer, while to others, she was a young woman unfairly portrayed as a villain. The case divided public opinion, sparking widespread debates about gender, privilege, and justice. For Fernando Pastorizo's family, the loss was immeasurable. The trial, with its accusations and fabrications, forced them to relive the pain of his death while fighting to preserve his memory. His parents, Gustavo and Silvia, mourned not only the loss of their son, but also the life he might have lived. Every photograph, every testimony, and every piece of evidence presented in court was a reminder of the future that had been stolen. On the other hand, Nahir's family faced their own reckoning. Her father, Marcelo Galarza, once a respected police officer, saw his career and reputation crumble. Later, Nahir would accuse him of being the real perpetrator, a claim widely regarded as a desperate attempt to escape justice. This accusation fractured the Galarza family, with Marcelo retreating into isolation, estranged from his wife and daughter. The trial not only exposed Nahir's actions, but also the cracks in the privileged upbringing that had enabled her manipulative behavior. The murder of Fernando Pastorizo remains a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked manipulation and violence. His story, tragically cut short, continues to resonate as a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of toxic relationships and the importance of seeking help before situations escalate. This case invites reflection on the societal factors that contributed to its outcome. How do privilege and influence affect the pursuit of justice? What lessons can be learned about addressing abusive relationships, regardless of the genders involved? And how can systems better protect individuals from the consequences of manipulation and control? As we end this video, we remember Fernando not just as a victim, but as a young man who deserved a life full of promise and happiness. His story serves as a call to action, reminding us that justice, though painful, can and must prevail. Let us honor his memory by making sure his story is never forgotten. If you found this story thought-provoking and want to explore more shocking cases with us, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our latest videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. The Police Department officially announced the resolution of a chilling mystery that spanned over 60 years. The brutal 1959 murder of 9-year-old Candi Rogers. As one of the oldest cold cases in Spokane and Washington state history, this tragedy haunted the community for decades. What truly happened to Candi on that fateful day? Was it a tragic accident or a calculated act of cruelty? The journey to justice for this innocent girl is one of heartbreak, determination, and extraordinary breakthroughs. Join us as we uncover this shocking story where human perseverance and the power of science finally brought the buried truth to light after more than 6 decades. Candi Rogers was born in 1950 to Elaine and Carl Rogers, a cherished and adored only child who was the center of her parents' world. Known for her cheerful demeanor and kind heart, Candi had a way of bringing joy to everyone around her. Bright and full of life, she was a 4th grader at Holmes Elementary School, where she excelled academically and socially. At just 9 years old, Candi had already developed a passion for helping others and exploring the world around her, thanks to her involvement in the Bluebirds, the junior division of the Campfire Girls. Whether it was hiking, participating in community service, or bonding with her peers during group activities, Candi embraced every moment with enthusiasm. Her mother, Elaine Rogers, played a pivotal role in Candi's upbringing. A dedicated school teacher, Elaine took on the responsibility of raising Candi as a single parent after divorcing Carl. Despite the inherent challenges of single motherhood, Elaine ensured that Candi had a stable and loving environment in which to grow. Her devotion to Candi was unwavering, and she worked hard to provide her daughter with every opportunity for a happy and fulfilling childhood. Candi's father, Carl Rogers, lived separately after the divorce, but continued to care for Candi from a distance. Tragically, Carl's life took a devastating turn after Candi's death. The profound loss of his daughter, coupled with the unanswered questions surrounding her disappearance and murder, left him emotionally shattered. In 1963, unable to cope with his grief, Carl took his own life. The Rogers family story is one of love, resilience, and unrelenting sorrow, encapsulating the immeasurable loss they endured when Candi's life was so cruelly taken. Even in the face of tragedy, the memory of Candi's vibrant spirit remained a source of strength and a reminder of the joy she brought to all who knew her. On the quiet afternoon of March 6, 1959, 9-year-old Candi Rogers set out with enthusiasm to support her Bluebirds group's fundraising efforts. The Bluebirds, a junior branch of the Campfire Girls, often held events and activities that Candi cherished, and she was determined to do her part. Carrying 7 neatly packed boxes of campfire mints, Candi left her home in the west-central neighborhood of Spokane at approximately 4 p.m. Her mother, Elaine, had given her permission, but reminded her of the family rule. She must return before dark. This was a routine Candi always followed, and Elaine, though protective, trusted her daughter to stay safe within their familiar neighborhood. As the afternoon turned to evening, Candi failed to return home. By 5:30 p.m., Elaine began to feel uneasy. It wasn't like Candi to lose track of time, especially with such a clear instruction to be home before sunset. Her concern grew, and by 6 p.m., Elaine was certain something was wrong. She quickly reached out to family, friends, and neighbors, explaining that Candi had not come home. The small community, known for its close-knit bonds, responded immediately. Groups of neighbors began searching the streets, calling out Candi's name and asking if anyone had seen her. Some reported seeing Candi earlier that afternoon, walking around the area with her boxes of mints, but no one could provide information on her whereabouts after that. As time dragged on, the search expanded. Authorities were alerted and soon joined the effort. Police and sheriff's deputies began combing through the area, but the initial search yielded little success. The only significant clue came later that night when a group of searchers discovered 6 of Candi's 7 boxes of campfire mints scattered along Petite Drive, a street not far from her home. The neatly packaged mints, abandoned in such a strange manner, sent a chilling signal to searchers that something was terribly wrong. Despite the growing efforts and mounting fear, the night ended with no sign of Candi. Her mother, Elaine, spent a sleepless night consumed by worry, holding on to the faint hope that her daughter would return safely. The scattered mints and Candi's disappearance cast a dark shadow over the community, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shake Spokane to its core. The search for Candi Rogers was one of the most extensive and determined efforts in Spokane's history, involving law enforcement, volunteers, and even the United States Air Force. The scale of the search expanded significantly in the days following her disappearance, with people combing through dense woods and checking major roads for any signs of the missing girl. To aid in the search, the Air Force provided a helicopter to survey the area from above, hoping to spot something that ground searchers might have missed. The helicopter, manned by 4 trained personnel and a pilot, took to the skies to assist in this critical mission. However, tragedy struck during the flight. While flying over the Spokane River, the pilot failed to see a high-tension wire until it was too late. The aircraft collided with the wire, and the impact was catastrophic. The helicopter spiraled out of control and crashed into the river, resulting in the immediate deaths of 3 of the 5 men on board. Airman Merleese D. Ray, Sergeant William A. McDonald, and Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fatek lost their lives in the crash, a devastating blow to the search effort in the community. The news of the accident deeply saddened everyone involved in the search for Candi. The deaths of the 3 brave men who had dedicated themselves to helping locate the missing girl weighed heavily on the hearts of the searchers and the Spokane community. However, instead of dampening their resolve, this tragic event strengthened their determination. The volunteers and law enforcement officers vowed that the sacrifices of the fallen heroes would not be in vain, intensifying their efforts to find Candi. Despite their unrelenting dedication, the search yielded no results for several agonizing days. It was as though Candi had simply vanished without a trace, leaving her family and community in a state of growing despair. Candi's mother, Elaine, bore the brunt of the uncertainty. As the days stretched on with no sign of her daughter, Elaine began to deteriorate visibly. She refused to eat, stared into space for hours on end, and became a shadow of her former self. The weight of not knowing what had happened to her only child was slowly breaking her spirit, and the burden of hope and fear combined was almost too much for her to bear. This intense period of heartbreak and uncertainty only served to underline the enormity of the tragedy that had befallen Candi's family and the entire Spokane community. The tragedy of Candi Rogers' disappearance reached its devastating conclusion on March 22, 1959, when her lifeless body was discovered in a remote wooded area. That day, two airmen, Howard Lawrence and Richard Bergen, were hunting woodchucks in an area roughly 7 miles from Candi's home, a region thick with trees and rarely frequented by the public. As the two men explored the clearing, something unusual caught their attention: a small pair of blue suede shoes. The shoes, delicately crafted and clearly belonging to a child, struck an eerie note in the otherwise quiet forest. Alarmed by their discovery, the airmen carried the shoes back to their base and contacted the police. The airmen's report reinvigorated the search effort, and early the next morning, March 23rd, law enforcement and volunteers flooded the wooded area to investigate further. Their determination was palpable. After more than 2 weeks of relentless searching, the hope of finding Candi had not yet faded entirely. However, as the search party combed through the forest, the grim reality of what had happened began to unfold. While sweeping the area, a law enforcement officer noticed an unusual mound of brush and pine needles, slightly disturbed and out of place in the natural surroundings. Approaching cautiously, he began to clear away the debris. What he found beneath was heartbreaking and horrifying. A child's small knee was visible, sticking out from under the pile. As he removed the remaining foliage, the full horror of the scene came to light. It was the body of Candi Rogers. Her condition left no doubt that she had suffered terribly in her final moments. Her clothing was torn in several places, and her feet were bound tightly with strips of fabric, restricting her movement. Another piece of fabric had been used as a ligature, cruelly wrapped around her neck, suggesting she had been strangled. Candi's body, hidden under the brush and left to decay in the woods, painted a chilling picture of a calculated and heinous crime. The Spokane community, which had been holding out hope that Candi might be found alive, was devastated by the news. Candi's mother, Elaine, was informed of the discovery and collapsed from the shock, requiring sedation. The revelation sent ripples of fear and heartbreak through the city. Families who had once felt safe in their neighborhoods now questioned the security of their children, and the search for Candi transformed into an urgent quest for justice. The autopsy that followed confirmed the horrifying details. Candi had been assaulted and then strangled to death, her small body bearing the marks of unimaginable suffering. These findings not only shattered the hearts of her family, but also galvanized detectives and law enforcement officers to find her killer, vowing not to rest until justice was served. The wooded area where Candi was found became a solemn landmark of grief for the Spokane community. The discovery was a turning point, marking the end of a desperate search, but the beginning of a relentless investigation. The horrifying circumstances surrounding Candi's death would haunt Spokane for decades and serve as a reminder of the profound tragedy of a life stolen far too soon. In the days following the discovery of Candi Rogers' body, detectives launched an intensive investigation, determined to catch the person responsible for such a brutal crime. From the outset, law enforcement suspected that Candi's death was the work of a dangerous individual, a maniac, as Spokane Police Chief Clifford Payne described it. The evidence at the crime scene painted a chilling picture of a calculated and heinous act, fueling the urgency to find the culprit. One of the first potential leads emerged from a curious detail found during the autopsy. Candi's clothing bore a strange purple smear that emitted a scent similar to grape gum. This peculiar clue led detectives to suspect Hugh Byron Morse, a known serial killer at the time, infamous for his obsession with grape-flavored gum. Morse had been incarcerated for other violent crimes, and his profile seemed to match what investigators believed about Candi's killer. Despite the circumstantial evidence, Morse vehemently denied involvement in Candi's murder. Unfortunately, forensic technology in the late 1950s and early 1960s was rudimentary at best. Without physical evidence or DNA analysis, detectives had no way to confirm his guilt. As a result, Morse remained a suspect but could not be charged, leaving Candi's case to grow colder with each passing year. Decades later, the case found new hope through the remarkable advancements in forensic science. In 2001, over 40 years after Candi's death, detectives revisited the evidence that had been carefully preserved from the original investigation. Among these items were Candi's clothing, which had been stored meticulously to maintain its integrity. Forensic scientists analyzed these garments using modern DNA techniques, hoping to uncover a profile that could lead to her killer. To the team's initial success, they were able to isolate a DNA profile from Candi's underwear. This breakthrough was monumental, as it provided the first concrete clue in the case in decades. However, when the profile was entered into the national database, it did not match any known offender, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. In 2017, the emergence of forensic genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge technique combining DNA analysis with genealogical research, offered a new avenue for solving cold cases. This revolutionary method had already helped crack several long unsolved crimes, and detectives believed it could provide the breakthrough Candi's case needed. However, there was an immediate setback. The original DNA sample extracted in 2001 had degraded over time, making it too fragile for the initial genealogical testing methods. With no clear suspects and no matches in the database, investigators faced yet another devastating roadblock. But their determination to bring justice for Candi remained unwavering. They would soon find that persistence, combined with the rapid evolution of forensic technology, would yield the answers they had sought for decades. After decades of frustration and dead ends, a major breakthrough came in 2018 when Spokane detectives learned of a specialized forensic laboratory in Texas called Othram. The lab had developed advanced techniques for working with degraded DNA samples, offering renewed hope for solving Candi Rogers' case. Detectives sent the fragile DNA sample, which had been stored since 2001, to the lab, and their efforts were rewarded. Othram successfully extracted a usable DNA profile from the sample, a monumental achievement given the age and condition of the evidence. The analysis pointed to a startling conclusion. 3 brothers, John, Andrew, and Terry Hoff, were identified as potential suspects. All 3 men had lived in Spokane at the time of Candi's murder, making them viable leads. Investigators immediately began delving into their lives, searching for any evidence that might tie them to Candi or her case. Among the 3 brothers, John Hoff quickly emerged as the most likely suspect. At the time of Candi's murder in 1959, Hoff lived just a mile away from her home, putting him in close proximity to her neighborhood and likely making him aware of her regular activities. Hoff's criminal history raised further alarms. In 1961, 2 years after Candi's death, Hoff was arrested for a violent assault on a woman. The details of the attack bore chilling similarities to what had been done to Candi. Hoff had approached the woman, used force to remove her clothing, and tied her up using the fabric he had torn. He then attempted to strangle her. Thankfully, the woman survived the ordeal and reported the attack. For this crime, Hoff was briefly jailed, serving only 6 months in prison. Upon his release, he was dishonorably discharged from the army and labeled a deserter. This history painted a disturbing picture of Hoff as a dangerous individual capable of the kind of violence inflicted on Candi. Detectives also discovered a potential link between Hoff and Candi's world. His stepsister was a member of the Camp Fire Girls, the same organization Candi was part of. This connection may have given Hoff opportunities to observe Candi or learn of her routines. Despite the growing evidence pointing to John Hoff as Candi's killer, there was one significant obstacle. Hoff had been dead for decades. In 1970, at the young age of 31, Hoff died by suicide. His untimely death had kept him off investigators' radar for years, as his name had never been connected to Candi's case until the DNA analysis revealed his potential involvement. For detectives, this presented a challenge. Without Hoff alive to question, they needed to find irrefutable proof that he was Candi's killer. The DNA analysis had pointed to him strongly, but additional steps were necessary to confirm the connection beyond any doubt. The final breakthrough in Candi Rogers' case came when investigators took the definitive step of exhuming John Hoff's remains to conclusively confirm his involvement in her murder. After obtaining a court order and receiving consent from Hoff's daughter, Kathy, detectives exhumed his body and extracted a DNA sample. This sample was sent to the forensic lab for analysis and comparison with the DNA profile developed from evidence on Candi's clothing. The results left no room for doubt. The DNA was a match. John Hoff was confirmed as Candi's killer, ending a 6-decade-long mystery. This conclusive evidence was the culmination of tireless investigative efforts, advancements in forensic science, and a relentless commitment to justice. For the detectives who had worked on the case over the years, the revelation was bittersweet. They had solved one of Spokane's most notorious cold cases, yet the killer had evaded justice in his lifetime. Still, the confirmation brought a sense of relief and accomplishment. The news of John Hoff's identification as Candi's murderer brought a mix of emotions to her surviving family members. Candi's cousin, Joanne Poss, who had long hoped for answers, expressed bittersweet relief. It's not closure, but at least there's some form of satisfaction knowing that the person that did it is at least named, Joanne said. However, she lamented that Candi's parents and grandparents had died without ever knowing the truth, adding to the lingering sadness of the case. For John Hoff's daughter, Kathy, the revelation was deeply unsettling. Hoff had died when Kathy was only 9 years old, and she had grown up with little understanding of his past. Learning that her father was responsible for such a heinous crime left her shaken. Kathy publicly apologized to Candi's family, expressing profound regret for her father's actions.
Very, very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly, and that he took her mom's life, really, took her dad's life. He took more lives than one.
She also shared her shock and sadness, remarking that her father had died with people believing he was an ordinary man, but in reality he had hidden a monstrous crime. Though Hoff's death spared him from facing legal consequences, his identification marked a symbolic victory for Candi's family and the Spokane community. By naming him as the killer, investigators ensured that Candi's story ended with answers and accountability. Her case became a testament to the power of persistence and the potential of forensic technology to uncover the truth, even decades after a crime. This final breakthrough brought a measure of justice to a family that had endured unimaginable pain for over 60 years. While it could never undo the tragedy, the resolution allowed Candi's legacy to be honored, and her name became a symbol of hope for countless other unresolved cases. The murder of Candi Rogers was a tragedy that forever altered the lives of her family and left a profound scar on the Spokane community. The brutal loss of such a bright and innocent child brought unimaginable grief to her parents, Elaine and Carl Rogers, who spent the rest of their lives searching for answers that never came. Carl succumbed to his pain, taking his own life in 1963, and Elaine passed away in 2006 without ever knowing the identity of Candi's killer. Their deaths, compounded by decades of uncertainty, highlighted the enduring devastation wrought by Candi's murder. For Spokane, the case was not just a tragedy, but also a turning point. It became one of the most haunting crimes in the city's history, leaving a legacy of fear and sorrow that persisted for generations. Parents in the community grew more protective of their children, and the memory of Candi's disappearance and death served as a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in even the most familiar surroundings. Yet, amid this heartbreak, the case also became a testament to persistence and the power of forensic science. Generations of detectives refused to let Candi's case be forgotten, working tirelessly for more than 6 decades to uncover the truth. The development of advanced forensic techniques, particularly DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, eventually brought the answers Candi's family and the community had long awaited. Though justice came too late for Candi's parents and the killer evaded punishment in life, the resolution of her case brought some solace to her surviving family members. It also underscored the importance of perseverance in seeking justice for victims, no matter how much time has passed. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe Candi's murder was premeditated, or was it an impulsive act by a disturbed individual? Share your perspective in the comments, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on more stories that delve into the pursuit of justice for victims and their families. Ashley Wadsworth, a 19-year-old woman from Vernon, British Columbia, Canada, embarked on what she hoped would be the adventure of a lifetime. After 6 years of a long-distance online relationship, she traveled across the globe to meet Jack Seal, her 22-year-old boyfriend from Chelmsford, England. Their love story, forged through years of virtual connection, seemed destined for a fairy tale ending. However, beneath the surface of their relationship lay troubling signs of control, manipulation, and growing instability. What began as a hopeful romance tragically unraveled into one of the most disturbing cases of domestic abuse and violence, leaving Ashley's family and friends devastated. This case raises profound questions. How did Ashley's trust in Jack blind her to the red flags? How did a story of love and devotion descend into a heartbreaking cycle of abuse, culminating in an unimaginable tragedy? In exploring Ashley's story, we confront themes of love, control, and obsession, and uncover lessons about the hidden dangers in seemingly loving relationships. Ashley Wadsworth was born on July 25, 2002, in the picturesque city of Vernon, British Columbia, Canada. She grew up surrounded by a large and close-knit extended family of more than 50 relatives, all living in the same community. The younger daughter of Kenneth and Christy, Ashley shared a particularly strong bond with her older sister, Haley. After her parents divorced, her father remarried, adding two half-siblings, Crystal and Brandon, to her life. Despite these changes, Ashley maintained deep ties to her family, cherishing her role as an aunt to her beloved niece, Paisley, Haley's daughter. Ashley's vibrant personality and adventurous spirit defined her. She was outgoing, warm, and universally loved by those who knew her. She thrived on outdoor activities such as swimming, horseback riding, skiing, and tennis, and had a creative side, expressed through playing the clarinet. Her lively presence and infectious sense of humor made her the heart of every gathering. Even in her teenage years, Ashley exhibited a fearless curiosity about the world, balancing her family connections with a desire for independence and exploration. This zest for life and her innate optimism were qualities her family and friends deeply admired, making her loss all the more devastating. Jack Seppel was born on January 9, 1999, in Essex, England. He grew up in a household with his mother, Tracy Dalton, and stepfather, Ricky, but his family life was marked by instability. Jack had limited contact with his late father and was estranged from his brother, Jordan. His most stable familial connection was with his sister Nadia, with whom he maintained a close relationship. Jack was often described as a paradox, a charming and humorous individual with an unpredictable and troubled personality. Beneath his outward charisma lay a history of volatile and aggressive behavior that became a defining feature of his relationships. Known for his obsessive tendencies, Jack displayed patterns of control and manipulation even in previous relationships. His actions frequently escalated to coercion and violence, often resulting in restraining orders and legal consequences. These troubling patterns hinted at a darker side, which eventually culminated in a tragic series of events during his relationship with Ashley Wadsworth. Despite occasional attempts at remorse, Jack's behavior revealed a persistent cycle of jealousy, emotional volatility, and unchecked aggression that would tragically spiral out of control. Ashley Wadsworth first connected with Jack Seppel in 2015 through social media, marking the beginning of a relationship that would span 6 years and ultimately lead to devastating consequences. At the time, Ashley was a bright and optimistic 12-year-old living in Vernon, British Columbia, Canada, while Jack was a 15-year-old teenager from Essex, England. Their friendship quickly grew as they bonded over shared interests, humor, and hours of conversations online. Over time, their connection deepened into a romantic relationship. Jack became an ever-present figure in Ashley's life through virtual calls, text messages, and online interactions. Although they had never met in person, their relationship became central to Ashley's daily life, and Jack's influence grew stronger. However, Jack's behavior began to show troubling signs of control and obsession. Jack often displayed jealousy and possessiveness, especially when it came to Ashley's interactions with others. During their arguments, Ashley would occasionally block Jack on social media, but he found ways to contact her through new accounts or mutual friends. His relentless determination to maintain contact raised concerns among Ashley's family and friends. One alarming incident involved Jack tattooing Ashley's name on his arm, a gesture that her parents viewed as excessive and unsettling. Despite these red flags, Ashley remained committed to Jack, believing in his affection and the connection they had built over the years. However, her family expressed serious reservations about the relationship. They were particularly uneasy about her desire to travel overseas to meet Jack in person, fearing for her safety. For several years, Ashley's family firmly restricted her from making such a trip, hoping to protect her from potential harm. As Ashley entered her late teens, her growing independence allowed her to take greater control of her decisions. She began saving money from her jobs at fast food restaurants and retail stores, determined to turn her dream of meeting Jack into a reality. By 2021, Ashley had saved enough to purchase a plane ticket and make arrangements for her first-ever international trip. On November 12, 2021, Ashley, then 19, boarded a plane to England with plans to meet Jack for the first time. She had obtained a 6-month tourist visa, envisioning a long visit where she could finally be with the man she had spent so many years connecting with online. This trip also marked a major milestone for Ashley, as it was her first time traveling abroad. Her excitement was palpable. On November 13, 2021, the day they met in person at London Gatwick Airport, Ashley updated her profile picture on social media to a photo of the two of them together. She was eager to share her happiness with her friends and family back in Canada. In the early days of her stay, Jack appeared to embody the caring and loving partner Ashley believed him to be, showering her with attention and affection. Ashley's family, though still apprehensive, supported her decision to follow her heart, hoping that her instincts about Jack would prove right. Little did they know that this seemingly joyful reunion would mark the beginning of a harrowing ordeal that would shatter their lives forever. Shortly after Ashley moved into Jack's small apartment in a public housing complex, his controlling tendencies began to surface. What started as seemingly harmless requests for her attention quickly turned into obsessive monitoring. Jack insisted on knowing Ashley's every move, forbidding her from speaking with neighbors and discouraging her from engaging with anyone outside their relationship. When Ashley expressed a desire to attend church services with missionaries she had been introduced to before her trip, Jack outright forbade it. Despite his restrictions, Ashley secretly maintained contact with the missionaries via text messages, carefully deleting their conversations to avoid provoking his anger. As weeks passed, Ashley confided to the missionaries about Jack's increasingly controlling behavior. She admitted she felt trapped and knew she deserved better, yet she remained determined to make the relationship work. Deep down, she believed that Jack was capable of change and that her love and support could help him overcome his issues. Her optimism and faith in their bond blinded her to the growing danger she faced. Jack's emotional manipulations soon escalated to physical violence. Just 6 weeks after Ashley's arrival, Jack texted his mother, admitting he had struck Ashley during a jealous rage. By this point, Ashley had begun documenting her injuries privately, taking photos of bruises and other marks on her body. She shared these with her older sister Haley, who was horrified and repeatedly begged her to leave Jack and return home. But Ashley refused, fearing her family would despise Jack if they knew the full extent of his behavior. Her deep attachment to Jack and belief in his ability to change kept her from walking away, even as the abuse became more severe. The violence continued to escalate. In early January 2022, during a heated argument, Jack smashed a beer glass over Ashley's head, leaving her injured and shaken. Distraught, Ashley called Haley on a video chat while trying to clean up the shattered glass. Haley could see Jack pacing in the background, shouting angrily as Ashley tried to minimize the incident. Haley begged her sister to return home, but Ashley once again insisted that Jack could improve and that her love could make a difference. In late December 2021, the situation became even more complicated when Jack attempted suicide by overdosing on anxiety medication. Ashley called for an ambulance, and Jack was hospitalized. Following his recovery, Ashley was officially designated as his caregiver, taking responsibility for administering his medication through a lockbox provided by medical staff. This new role placed immense pressure on Ashley, who now felt even more obligated to stay by Jack's side. She believed that leaving him in such a vulnerable state would only worsen his mental health and potentially lead to another suicide attempt. Despite Ashley's unwavering support, Jack's behavior showed no signs of improvement. By late January 2022, his controlling tendencies and violent outbursts had reached a breaking point. During another argument, Jack accused Ashley of infidelity, becoming enraged when he believed she was hiding things from him. He threw a candle and a television remote at her, leaving her injured once again. This time, Ashley began to seriously consider leaving. She contacted her family, and together they started making plans for her to return to Canada. Her family booked a flight for February 3, 2022, and Ashley appeared ready to leave Jack behind. However, as the date of her departure approached, Ashley's resolve began to waver. She still clung to the belief that Jack could return to being the caring, loving person she had fallen in love with over the years. She convinced herself that the Jack she knew from their years of online communication was still somewhere beneath his violent and controlling behavior. Trapped in a cycle of abuse, apologies, and fleeting moments of hope, Ashley struggled to break free. Her decision to stay, even for a few more days, would ultimately seal her fate in the most tragic way imaginable. The events of February 1st, 2022 marked the culmination of the escalating of violence and control Jack Seppel had inflicted on Ashley Wadsworth during her time in Chelmsford. That morning, Jack became enraged after accusing Ashley of infidelity, convinced she was hiding something from him. This led to a heated and violent altercation during which Ashley attempted to seek help. Barefoot and visibly distressed, she ran to a neighbor's door, crying and bleeding from a cut on her hand. She explained that Jack had attacked her, smashed her phone, and even thrown their puppy Winston against the wall. Despite the neighbor's pleas to call the police and to accompany her to safety, Ashley refused, fearing retaliation from Jack. She begged the neighbor not to involve authorities and returned to Jack's apartment, likely in an attempt to calm the situation. The neighbor, reluctantly honoring Ashley's request, confronted Jack directly. Jack appeared calm and apologetic, convincing the neighbor that he had things under control. This brief moment of intervention was tragically not enough to prevent the horrors that would follow. Shortly after Ashley returned to the apartment, Jack's rage escalated beyond control. Sometime between 12:38 p.m. and 12:45 p.m., Jack strangled Ashley until she stopped breathing. He then retrieved a knife from the kitchen and proceeded to stab her over 90 times in her chest and abdomen. The brutality of the attack left no doubt about his intent, and his actions afterward revealed his disturbing state of mind. Following the murder, Jack showed no immediate remorse. Instead, he casually carried on with his day, even playing video games in the apartment while Ashley's lifeless body lay nearby. He changed his profile picture on social media to one of him and Ashley, captioned with the chilling phrase, "Always mine." Jack also recorded a video message addressed to Ashley's sister, Haley. In the video, Jack expressed love for Ashley and apologized, claiming he couldn't let her go and that his mind wasn't functioning properly. In the background of the video, Ashley's body was visible. Although Jack never sent the video, it became a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. During this time, Ashley's family in Vernon, Canada, awoke to a series of desperate messages she had sent earlier in the day, pleading for help. Alarmed by the messages and the lack of further responses, they contacted a friend of Ashley's in Chelmsford to check on her. When the friend received no response at Jack's apartment, he called the police, who arrived at the scene at approximately 4:13 p.m. Meanwhile, Jack called his sister, Nadia, and confessed to the murder. He even showed her Ashley's body during a video call, further confirming the horrific events. Upon entering the apartment, police discovered Jack covered in blood. Ashley's body bore the evidence of a prolonged and brutal attack, with injuries consistent with strangulation and over 90 stab wounds. Jack was immediately arrested and taken into custody. During questioning, he admitted to the murder, claiming he had experienced a psychotic episode. Toxicology reports later revealed that Jack had cannabis and therapeutic levels of anti-anxiety medication in his system at the time of the crime. His confession, the video recording, and the physical evidence left no doubt about his guilt. Back in Canada, Ashley's family received the devastating confirmation of her death from British authorities. Their worst fears, ignited by her earlier desperate messages, had come true. The tragedy marked the conclusion of an abusive relationship that had spiraled out of control, leaving Ashley's family and friends grappling with an unimaginable loss. The discovery of Ashley's body and the subsequent investigation into Jack's history would reveal a pattern of violence that had been overlooked for years, sparking calls for better measures to protect victims of domestic abuse. The investigation into Ashley Wadsworth's murder uncovered a deeply troubling history of violence and abusive behavior by Jack Seppel. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that Ashley's tragic death was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a long-standing pattern of coercive and violent tendencies. Jack's criminal record revealed multiple prior incidents of abuse, manipulation, and violence in his past relationships. These included physical assaults, false imprisonment, and ongoing threats against former partners. In one particularly alarming case, Jack had violated a restraining order against an ex-girlfriend and hacked her social media accounts to humiliate her. In another instance, he had been accused of choking and imprisoning a partner in his home. Despite these serious offenses, many charges against Jack were dropped when victims failed to testify, allowing his behavior to escalate unchecked. Toxicology reports conducted after Ashley's murder indicated that Jack had traces of cannabis in his system, but no substances that could justify or explain his violent actions. Additionally, psychiatric evaluations found him mentally fit to stand trial, ruling out any claims of diminished responsibility due to mental health issues. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including video footage he recorded after the murder, his confession to his sister, and physical evidence at the crime scene, Jack Seppel pleaded guilty to Ashley's murder. His admission of guilt spared Ashley's family the trauma of a prolonged trial, but did little to ease the profound pain of their loss. On October 10, 2022, Jack Seppel was sentenced to life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after 23 years. The sentencing judge emphasized the premeditated and brutal nature of the crime, stating that Jack's actions were fueled by jealousy, possessiveness, and an utter lack of regard for Ashley's life. While the guilty plea and sentencing brought a sense of closure to Ashley's grieving family, they were left grappling with the haunting question of whether more could have been done to prevent her death. Jack's imprisonment ensured that he would no longer pose a threat to others, but for Ashley's family, justice came too late to save the bright and loving young woman who had so much ahead of her. Following the tragic death of Ashley Wadsworth, her family became vocal advocates for increased awareness and better protections against domestic abuse. One of the key issues they highlighted was the lack of accessible information about Jack Seppel's history of violence. Despite his extensive criminal record, which included previous incidents of abuse, restraining orders, and coercive behavior, Ashley's family was unaware of the danger he posed when she traveled to England. Ashley's parents expressed profound frustration at the inability to uncover Jack's dangerous past before it was too late. They revealed that they had conducted online searches about Jack before Ashley's trip, but found no alarming details. This limitation underscored a critical gap in public access to information about individuals with histories of domestic violence. In the UK, Clare's Law, officially known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, allows individuals to request information about a partner's criminal record concerning domestic abuse. It also permits police to proactively disclose such information when they believe someone is at risk. However, Ashley's family, living in Canada, was unaware of this policy and unable to make use of it. Even within the UK, the process can be slow, and disclosure is not guaranteed, leaving many potential victims without vital information. Ashley's parents have since called for reforms to make systems like Clare's Law more widely known and easily accessible. They believe proactive measures, such as mandatory background checks for individuals with repeated offenses, could save lives. The family also emphasized the need for greater international collaboration in addressing domestic abuse, as Ashley's case demonstrated how victims can unknowingly enter dangerous situations when crossing borders. Ashley's mother, in particular, voiced the heartbreaking thought that if she had known about Clare's Law and requested a disclosure, the family might have been able to prevent Ashley's trip. This advocacy for reform is now a crucial part of Ashley's legacy, as her family strives to ensure that other families have access to the information and tools they need to protect their loved ones from similar fates. The tragic loss of Ashley Wadsworth left an indelible mark on her family, friends, and communities both in Canada and England. In the wake of her death, Ashley's loved ones honored her memory and began a journey of advocacy to address systemic issues surrounding domestic violence. Shortly after the sentencing of Jack Seppel, Ashley's family held a solemn vigil in Chelmsford, England, near the location where she had spent her final days. Joined by supporters, they walked through the neighborhood, laying flowers and wreaths on the doorstep of Jack's apartment in her memory. The vigil was an emotional moment of reflection and solidarity, as neighbors, some of whom had attended Jack's trial, gathered to show their support for Ashley's grieving family. Following the vigil, Ashley's remains were repatriated to Canada. Her family organized a funeral that took place on February 23, 2022, attended by hundreds of mourners in Vernon, British Columbia. The ceremony was also live-streamed, allowing friends and supporters who couldn't attend in person to pay their respects. During the service, Ashley was remembered as a vibrant, adventurous young woman with an infectious sense of humor and a deep love for her family. The family received an outpouring of support from their community, raising significant funds through a crowdfunding campaign. These donations not only helped cover the costs of repatriating Ashley's remains and the funeral, but also allowed the family to establish a scholarship foundation in her name. Additionally, part of the funds was donated to a domestic violence support organization, ensuring that Ashley's story could contribute to helping other victims escape abusive situations. Through their ongoing advocacy, Ashley's family has shown a light on the systemic failures that allow abusers to continue their cycles of violence. They have spoken out about the importance of domestic violence awareness, calling for reforms to policies like Clare's Law and increased international cooperation in protecting potential victims. Their efforts are a testament to their determination to turn their unimaginable loss into a force for change, ensuring that Ashley's legacy is one of hope, education, and justice for those in similar circumstances. Ashley Wadsworth's story is a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers that can lurk within seemingly loving relationships. Her tragic death underscores the urgent need to recognize the warning signs of abuse and take proactive measures to protect those at risk. Ashley's case demonstrates how cycles of control, manipulation, and violence can escalate, often leaving victims feeling trapped and isolated. Awareness initiatives, such as Clare's Law in the UK, are vital tools that can save lives. These policies empower individuals to access critical information about a partner's history of domestic abuse. However, Ashley's case highlights significant barriers that remain. Many people, like Ashley and her family, are unaware of these protections, and the process for obtaining such information can be slow and inconsistent. Streamlining and expanding access to such resources is essential to ensuring that vulnerable individuals receive timely and effective support. This tragic case also calls attention to the importance of sharing stories like Ashley's. By shining a light on the realities of domestic abuse, survivors, families, and advocates can help others recognize the risks and seek help before it is too late. Raising awareness not only honors the memory of those lost to domestic violence, but also fosters a culture of vigilance and prevention. We invite you to share your own stories and experiences to help shed light on this critical issue. Whether you face similar challenges, supported a loved one through an abusive situation, or wish to advocate for change, your voice can make a difference. Together, we can work toward creating a world where individuals like Ashley are protected, supported, and empowered to live free from fear and harm. Let Ashley's story serve as a powerful call to action, to recognize the signs of abuse, to educate ourselves and others, and to push for systemic changes that will save lives. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories and investigations. Let's uncover the truth together. Your support can make a real difference. How well do you really know the people you once loved? They say love can bring out the best in us, but what happens when it reveals the darkest corners of someone's soul? Today we dive into the tragic and shocking story of Gladis Ricard, a woman whose inspiring journey from humble beginnings to achieving the American dream came to a devastating end at the hands of someone she trusted the most. Gladis was a hardworking immigrant, a single mother, and a woman who overcame every obstacle life threw her way. When she met Augustine Garcia, she thought she had finally found happiness, a kind, successful man who seemed like the perfect partner. But beneath his charming facade was a dangerous possessiveness that would turn her life into a nightmare. On what should have been the happiest day of her life, surrounded by loved ones and moments away from saying, "I do," Gladis faced the unthinkable. This is the story of love turned to obsession, of betrayal, control, and the tragic consequences of ignoring the warning signs. Stay with us as we uncover the events leading up to this heartbreaking tragedy, the pursuit of justice, and the powerful lessons this case leaves behind. This is a story of hope, horror, and a cautionary tale that everyone needs to hear. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss this. Gladis Ricard was born on December 19, 1960, in a small province in the Dominican Republic. The youngest of three siblings, she grew up in a modest but tightly knit family with her elder sister, Norma, and her brother, Juan. Her parents worked tirelessly to provide their children with opportunities they never had, instilling in them a strong sense of resilience and determination. From an early age, Gladis showed exceptional promise, excelling in school and earning recognition as one of the best students in her class. She was inspired by her sister Norma, who had immigrated to New York City in the mid-1970s and successfully built a new life there. Gladis dreamed of following in her sister's footsteps and providing a brighter future for herself and her family. However, her path would be fraught with challenges. At just 17 years old, Gladis experienced her first love, but the relationship ended in heartbreak when she became pregnant and her boyfriend abandoned her. Despite the societal stigma, Gladys made the courageous decision to keep her child, a son she named Davis. With the unwavering support of her parents, she embraced the difficult role of a single mother, determined to build a better future for her son. For several years, Gladys worked tirelessly, taking on whatever jobs she could find while saving every penny. Her ultimate goal was to join Norma in the United States and create a life of opportunities for herself and Davis. Finally, in 1982, after years of hard work and sacrifice, Gladys achieved her dream. She moved to New York City, where she joined Norma and her family in their Manhattan home. Adjusting to life in a new country was far from easy. Gladys, who spoke little English, took on a series of physically demanding jobs, including washing dishes, handing out flyers, and stocking supermarket shelves. She balanced these jobs with English classes, determined to overcome the language barrier and create a stable foundation for her future. Her efforts paid off when she secured a position as an accountant, marking the start of a promising career. Driven to succeed, Gladys enrolled in a prestigious university to study economics while continuing to work. By 1985, her relentless dedication paid off, and she became the chief accountant of a Manhattan travel company, earning respect as a hardworking and indispensable employee. Around this time, she also reunited with Davis, who had been living with her parents in the Dominican Republic. Finally together, Gladys provided her son with the opportunities she had worked so hard to secure. Gladys's commitment to her family extended far beyond her own success. Over the years, she played a pivotal role in reuniting her loved ones in New York. Together with Norma, she helped bring their parents, Juan, and his wife and children to the United States. The entire family settled in Manhattan, creating a close-knit network of support. Gladys was deeply involved in their lives, always ready to offer help and encouragement. By the early 1990s, Gladys seemed to have achieved the American dream. She had a successful career, a comfortable home, and a loving family who admired her strength and determination. Yet, despite all her accomplishments, one part of her dream remained unfulfilled: finding a partner who could share in the life she had built. Gladis Ricard and Augustine Garcia first crossed paths on a warm autumn morning in the bustling subway system of New York City. Gladys, dressed in her professional business attire, was on her way to work, like any other day. Her life, though busy and fulfilling, still felt like it was missing a piece: a partner to share her accomplishments and dreams. Augustine Garcia, 41 years old and a fellow Dominican immigrant, happened to be on the same subway car that day. Normally, Augustine didn't take public transportation. He had a collection of luxury cars that he used to commute. However, on this particular day, his car was in the shop, and with Manhattan gridlocked by traffic, he decided to take the subway to get to an important meeting on time. As the subway car jolted to a stop, Augustine noticed Gladys. With her polished demeanor and composed confidence, she immediately caught his attention. He offered her his seat, a small but gallant gesture, and struck up a casual conversation. Augustine quickly revealed his charm and humor, making Gladys smile as they talked. Their conversation flowed easily as they shared their experiences of immigrating from the Dominican Republic and building new lives in the United States. Augustine spoke about his successful businesses and his role as a leader in the Dominican community, emphasizing his charitable efforts and commitment to helping others. Augustine Garcia was born in February 1951 in the Dominican Republic, where his early life was shaped by hardship and loss. Growing up in poverty, he faced significant challenges as the son of a single mother who worked tirelessly to provide for him. His father was absent from his life, and when Augustine was still young, his mother passed away, leaving him orphaned and with no safety net. Determined to escape his difficult circumstances, Augustine set his sights on a better future, eventually immigrating to the United States in the mid-1970s. Arriving in New York City with little more than his ambition, Augustine began working tirelessly to establish himself. He took on any job he could find, juggling multiple roles and enduring long hours to make ends meet. Through sheer determination, he gradually built a stable foundation and began transitioning from manual labor to entrepreneurial pursuits. His relentless drive led to remarkable success, and by the 1980s, he had become a prominent figure within New York's Dominican community. Augustine founded several businesses, amassing wealth and earning a reputation for his accomplishments. He also became deeply involved in community leadership, serving as the head of the Dominican Chamber of Commerce and spearheading various philanthropic initiatives. His contributions included funding English language programs, establishing job placement services for immigrants, and supporting education projects in his homeland. Augustine's acts of generosity earned him admiration and respect, cementing his image as a self-made man who gave back to his community. Despite his outward success and public acclaim, Augustine's personal life was far more complicated. He had been married and divorced, gaining sole custody of his two sons, a rare accomplishment that bolstered his image as a devoted father. Known for being strict but protective, he took pride in raising his sons with the same discipline and resilience that had guided his own life. Before they reached their respective stops, Augustine took the initiative to solidify their connection. He handed her a business card with both his professional contact information and his personal phone number, ensuring she could reach him directly. He then politely asked for her phone number, which Gladys, flattered by his attention and impressed by his demeanor, shared without hesitation. Later that evening, Augustine called Gladys, initiating the first of many conversations that would draw them closer together. Their initial meeting on the subway felt serendipitous, a seemingly ordinary moment that would dramatically alter the course of Gladys' life. For Gladys, it felt like the beginning of something promising. In the early days, Augustine was attentive and generous, showering Gladys with lavish gifts, flowers, and compliments. He treated her to fine dining experiences and introduced her to a more glamorous lifestyle. The relationship moved quickly, and soon Augustine invited Gladys and her teenage son Davis to move into his large, luxurious home. At first, it seemed like a dream come true, a chance at the stable, loving family life Gladys had long desired. However, cracks in the relationship began to show almost immediately after they moved in together. Augustine's teenage sons from his previous marriage, both older than Davis, began to bully and mistreat the boy. The hostility escalated, with frequent conflicts and even physical altercations. Despite clear evidence that his sons were the aggressors, Augustine consistently sided with them, dismissing Gladys's concerns and refusing to intervene. This created a tense and toxic atmosphere in the home, leaving Gladys feeling helpless as she watched her son suffer. As the situation with their children worsened, Augustine's behavior toward Gladys also began to change. He became increasingly controlling, demanding to know her whereabouts at all times, and questioning her about her social interactions, both at work and in her personal life. At first, his inquiries seemed framed by concern, but they soon escalated into relentless surveillance. Augustine would call her constantly, show up unannounced, and scrutinize her every move. His possessive nature started to overshadow the affection he once showed. Fearing for her son's well-being, Gladys made the difficult decision to leave Augustine's home. She moved out with Davis, but Augustine was unwilling to let go of the relationship. He rented a separate house for Gladys and her son, convincing her to continue seeing him. While she hesitated to end things completely, she began to recognize troubling patterns in his behavior. Over time, Augustine's possessiveness intensified. He made demands on her time, constantly called to ensure she was at home or work, and questioned her friendships and professional relationships. While still outwardly maintaining the facade of a devoted partner, bringing flowers, taking her on trips, and maintaining ties with her family, he was quietly isolating her from those closest to her. When Gladys confronted Augustine about his controlling behavior, his temper flared. She attempted to break off the relationship several times, but Augustine's threats of violence and dramatic displays of anger left her frightened. On one occasion, when she tried to end things after discovering his infidelity, he brandished a gun and threatened to kill her if she ever left him. This terrifying incident kept her trapped in the relationship for over a year, despite her growing fear and unhappiness. By late 1998, Gladys had reached her breaking point. After catching Augustine cheating again, she firmly declared the relationship over and moved out of the house he had rented for her. For a time, she believed she had finally escaped his grasp, but she was unaware that Augustine's obsession with her was only growing. What had once seemed like a fairy tale romance had devolved into a dangerous and toxic relationship, with Augustine determined to control Gladys at any cost. This toxic dynamic laid the foundation for the tragedy that would unfold less than a year later. What began as a story of love and mutual admiration had turned into a harrowing nightmare fueled by obsession, jealousy, and unchecked possessiveness. Gladys and James' love story had been a bright spot in her life after the darkness of her tumultuous relationship with Augustine Garcia. They had met at a popular restaurant in early 1999, where James' quiet charm and shared profession as an accountant immediately drew her in. In his free time, James devoted himself to his passion for writing music, a hobby that reflected his creativity and sensitivity. The two felt an instant connection, and their relationship blossomed into something filled with mutual respect and affection. However, Gladys had no idea that her ex Augustine had not moved on. Obsessed and unwilling to let her go, he continued to stalk her, watching her closely and even lurking outside her home. On one occasion, when Gladys and James were spending time together at her house, there was a knock on the door. To their shock, Augustine stood on the doorstep, demanding to speak with Gladys. When she refused and asked him to leave, he flew into a rage, shouting and hurling stones at the windows. Frightened, Gladys called the police, but she chose not to press charges, a decision that would later prove fatal. As the summer of 1999 arrived, James proposed to Gladys and she joyfully accepted. The couple set their wedding date for September 26th, with plans to honeymoon in Hawaii. As they prepared for the celebration, sending out invitations and gathering with loved ones, it seemed that nothing could stand in the way of their happiness. But Augustine's obsession continued to escalate. Just 2 weeks before the wedding, on September 12th, Gladys encountered him unexpectedly at a shopping mall. He approached her, put his arm around her waist as if they were still a couple, and offered to escort her. Terrified by his audacity, but aware of his temper, Gladys did not resist. Instead, she made an excuse about having an urgent matter to attend to and quickly hurried away, desperate to avoid further confrontation. Unknown to her, Augustine was quietly building up to the moment he would exact his revenge. His growing anger, obsession, and refusal to let go would soon culminate in an unthinkable act of violence on what should have been the happiest day of her life. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Gladys Ricard's life. On September 26, 1999, she was surrounded by family and friends in her Ridgefield, New Jersey home, dressed in the stunning white gown she had always dreamed of. Laughter and celebration filled the air as Gladys handed out bouquets to her nieces and posed for photographs. Her fiancé, James Preston, was waiting at the church, eager to say their vows and start their new life together. The cameras were rolling, capturing every joyful moment for what should have been a treasured family archive. At around 3:00 p.m., that joy was shattered. Outside the house, a car pulled up and parked across the street. It was Augustine Garcia, Gladys's ex-boyfriend, who had been stalking her relentlessly since their breakup. He stepped out of the car carrying a briefcase and made his way toward the house. Spotting him from the doorway, Gladys's brother, Juan, immediately intercepted him. "What are you doing here?" Juan demanded. Augustine, wearing a calm and confident expression, claimed that he had been invited and insisted on speaking with Gladys. Despite the unease in his gut, Juan reluctantly allowed him to enter, not wanting to cause a scene in front of the gathered guests. Augustine stepped inside, scanning the room until his eyes locked on Gladys. The moments that followed were captured on video, but no one could have predicted the horror about to unfold. As Gladys stood in the living room, her focus likely on the joyful moments ahead, Augustine walked directly toward her. His demeanor was unnervingly calm. Then, without warning, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a .38 caliber revolver. Gasps and screams erupted as Augustine raised the gun. Gladys barely had time to react before the first shot rang out, striking her in the shoulder. She stumbled back, but there was no time to escape. The second shot hit her squarely in the chest, and as she collapsed to the floor, the third shot pierced her head, leaving no chance of survival. The once cheerful home descended into chaos. Family members screamed and cried, frozen in shock at the unthinkable act they had just witnessed. Wedding photographers, hired to document a day of love and happiness, stood paralyzed, their cameras still recording. The footage showed everything: the calculated way Augustine approached Gladys, his cold and deliberate actions, and the horrifying finality of the shots. As the room erupted around him, Augustine stood motionless, the gun still in his hand. He made no attempt to run. When police arrived moments later, he surrendered without resistance, his expression eerily composed, as if what he had just done was entirely justified in his mind. Gladys Ricard's wedding day, meant to mark a new beginning, had become a scene of unspeakable tragedy. The joy and hope she had fought so hard to build were destroyed in an instant, leaving behind a devastated family and a haunting question: how could someone who once professed love commit such a heinous act? In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Augustine Garcia was taken into custody, where he offered a startling and contradictory account of events. During his initial interrogation, he claimed he had no idea that Gladys Ricard was getting married that day. He alleged that he had only stopped by the house after noticing a gathering of people and cars outside. According to Augustine, when he entered the home, he was attacked by Gladys' brother, Juan, and her son Davis, which caused him to pull out his gun in self-defense. He insisted the shooting was an accident, claiming he had no intention of killing Gladys. As investigators reviewed the evidence, it became apparent that Augustine's story was a fabrication. Witness testimonies from Gladys's family and friends further contradicted his version of events, describing how he had entered the home uninvited and carried out the attack without provocation. Despite this, Augustine's legal team shifted tactics, determined to mount an aggressive defense. In an attempt to salvage their case, Augustine's lawyers turned their focus onto Gladys herself. They portrayed her as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had continued to accept Augustine's gifts and financial support while secretly planning her wedding to James Preston. The defense suggested that Augustine, heartbroken and blindsided by her alleged betrayal, had acted in a state of temporary insanity brought on by emotional distress. The media latched onto these claims, and the narrative of the case briefly shifted. Augustine's lawyers organized press conferences and interviews, casting him as a victim of Gladys's supposed dishonesty and as a man pushed to his breaking point. While some members of the public sympathized with this portrayal, the prosecution relied on the damning video evidence to dismantle the defense's arguments. The tape clearly showed Augustine's deliberate actions, entering the home with a gun concealed in his briefcase, approaching Gladys with calm precision, and shooting her in cold blood. The claims of self-defense and temporary insanity fell apart under the weight of this irrefutable evidence, which captured not only the murder itself but also Augustine's chilling composure throughout. The investigation left no doubt that this was a calculated and premeditated act, and Augustine's attempts to rewrite the narrative only further solidified the case against him. What began as a web of lies and victim blaming was exposed as the cold-blooded murder of a woman on what should have been the happiest day of her life. After a lengthy trial filled with shocking revelations and emotional testimony, the case against Augustine Garcia reached its conclusion in February 2002. The prosecution had presented overwhelming evidence, including the chilling video footage of the murder, eyewitness testimonies from Gladys Ricard's family and friends, and a detailed account of Augustine's escalating possessiveness and threats in the months leading up to the tragedy. The defense's arguments of self-defense and temporary insanity crumbled under scrutiny. The video evidence alone was devastating, showing Augustine's deliberate actions, entering the house with a concealed weapon, approaching Gladys without provocation, and shooting her at point-blank range. The jury was left with no doubt about his intent. On February 1, 2002, Augustine Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Despite the defense's attempts to paint him as a victim of emotional distress, the verdict reflected the calculated and premeditated nature of his actions. Augustine later attempted to appeal the conviction, claiming that he had acted in a state of shock and temporary insanity upon discovering Gladys's wedding. However, the appeal was denied, with the courts reaffirming the original sentence. The verdict brought a measure of justice for Gladys Ricard's grieving family, who had endured not only the loss of a beloved mother, sister, and friend, but also the public character attacks on her during the trial. While Augustine Garcia would spend decades behind bars, the devastating impact of his actions would forever haunt those who loved Gladys. The tragic murder of Gladys Ricard serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers posed by unchecked possessiveness and abusive relationships. Her story highlights the importance of recognizing warning signs and taking proactive steps to protect oneself. Augustine Garcia's controlling behavior, violent threats, and obsessive actions were clear red flags that should have been met with immediate intervention. Unfortunately, like many victims of abuse, Gladys hesitated to involve law enforcement, a decision influenced by fear, love, and cultural stigmas. This reluctance to seek legal protection ultimately proved to be a fatal mistake. Gladys's death also underscores the devastating consequences of ignoring or downplaying threats from an abusive partner. Augustine's actions, from his attempts to isolate her to his threats of violence, formed a pattern of escalating danger. Her murder is a sobering lesson about the importance of taking such threats seriously and ensuring that victims have access to support and resources. The case sent shockwaves through the community, sparking vital conversations about domestic violence, stalking, and the need for better awareness and intervention. Gladys's story has become a rallying cry for advocates fighting against intimate partner violence, urging victims to recognize abusive behaviors and seek help before it's too late. Community organizations and law enforcement have since called for more robust resources and strategies to protect individuals at risk. Her tragic death remains a painful reminder of how love can turn into obsession and control. It serves as a cautionary tale, encouraging victims to prioritize their safety and well-being, and inspiring others to offer support to those in dangerous relationships. Gladys's story, though heartbreaking, continues to drive awareness and action to prevent similar tragedies in the future. If Gladis Ricard's story moved you, it's a powerful reminder of the importance of awareness and action in the face of domestic violence. Stories like hers deserve to be told, not only to honor her memory, but to spark conversations that could save lives. If you'd like to hear more true crime stories that uncover the darkest corners of humanity and shed light on the lessons we can learn, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Let's keep these discussions alive. Share your thoughts, insights, or similar stories in the comments below. Your voice can help create awareness and offer support to those who may be facing similar challenges. Together, we can bring these stories to light and work toward a safer future for everyone.